What's up guys, June here with a video that was requested by my buddy Travis. Basically I'm just going to talk about my layout and my additional action bars that I have open and why I have everything on them in the locations that I do. He's looking to set up his layout in a similar way so that he has everything accessible that he might need for PvM. I keep my inventory and my map and everything on the right side very similar to the way that you would before the interface was customizable. I have 5 primary bars, 3 for DPS and a ranged and a mage tank bar, and then all of my additional action bars open on the side there. So let's go through each of those 3 bars and talk about what's on them one by one. Starting with the first bar at the top, we have Freedom and Anticipation, and these should be pretty much self-explanatory. Even if the boss that you happen to be fighting doesn't have any actual mechanics that require you to use Freedom or Anticipation, you'll probably end up using them anyway just for adrenaline stalling, and so many different bosses utilize these that really they would just end up being on every single bar that you would have anyway if you decided not to open them on a sidebar. Right below that I have Devotion and Debilitate, and these should also be pretty much self-explanatory. Devotion is a really commonly used ability because it's great to mitigate incoming damage, and Debilitate in the same way. These will come in handy at almost every single boss you'll do, and thus I keep them over here because they would end up on pretty much every bar otherwise. Beneath that I have Resonance and Preparation, which are both shield abilities, and these are pretty much here for use as an adrenaline stall mechanic, especially at Virago. Anytime you are going between phases or anything like that, it's very useful to stall adrenaline, and between Freedom, Anticipation, Resonance, Preparation, and Escape, you can usually cycle those well enough that you will actually never drop out of the combat stance and lose adrenaline. Having Resonance on here can also be convenient if you're doing the DPS role at Yakamaru, because when Yakamaru throws a jellyfish, generally the DPS stands on the geysers to deal a huge amount of damage to the jellyfish rather than having to kill them manually. And the 1800-ish damage that you receive from the geysers is a mage hit, so you can Resonance that without having to do any kind of prayer switching or anything for Yakamaru, and you can really do a really great job of maintaining your HP and your food reserves there. Underneath Preparation I have Natural Instinct, which most of you probably won't find very useful for most circumstances. However, I use it kind of frequently at Yakamaru because generally I'm base tanking, and utilizing Natural Instinct can be a really great way to deal considerable DPS as the base tank because you can combine Natural Instinct with a Sunshine rotation and still end up having enough adrenaline to use things like Immortality to really put yourself in low risk situations where you don't have to use food but you're also not taking considerable amounts of damage or in any risk of dying. Everything else on the bottom half of this first bar is prayer switches. On the left side I've got Soul Split and then the 3 deflect prayers because generally at different bosses you're going to be flicking back and forth between these. And on the right side I keep my turmoil switches, so for example at Calphite King when you're swapping between styles you need to switch between the relevant turmoil prayers, and this really keeps me from ever having to open up the prayer book for any reason and saves a lot of space in the layout. For the second of these bars, at the top left I have Sacrifice, and I use this pretty commonly as the base tank just to get a little bit of extra heal in. Even if you're not base tanking, this can be useful on the North Pole of Yakamaru because the very first hit after the person is stunning the North Pole, you can hit 5 to 10k with your Sacrifice, and you'll heal a really considerable amount and save yourself 1 or 2 pieces of food every time you use that. To the right of that I keep Tuska's Wrath, which obviously I want to use manually whenever I'm doing Slayer because I want to use it on a fresh monster to deal the full 10 to 12k damage hit with that, rather than keeping that as part of my normal ability rotation and risking using that on a monster that maybe only has 500 to 1k HP left and wasting the effect of that. Beneath that I have Storm Shards and Shatter, and these both come in very handy at Virago, both for stalling adrenaline on Reflects and also for saving up and dealing really good damage on P3 and P5. Beneath that I have Provoke and Insight, which I use very frequently because I'm usually doing tank rolls at raids and at Virago, and Provoke and Insight respectively come in very handy for those. Beneath that on the left side I have Ice Asylum, which is a good thing especially for the DPS people at Yakamaru to use. You can really get by with no healers anyway, but if the team is a little bit less experienced and needs some extra healing, one person using an Ice Asylum in the DPS pile is a really convenient way to give everybody a pretty huge amount of HP and can come in very handy there. To the right of that I have Transfigure, and to be fair, Transfigure is not a very useful ability. However, I have been using it a little bit recently on P1 of Virago as bomb tank because occasionally I'm going with inexperienced teams, and if the jumper is not very good at their role, the phase takes way longer than it needs to, and instead of doing DPS, which isn't necessary because the phase is already 2 to 3 minutes or something anyway, you really want to be protecting your food stores, and Transfigure's a good way to deal with some of the reds that you can't Cade because Cade's on cooldown. Under that I keep Onslaught, which since the recent buff is such a useful ability that you pretty much want to use it at every boss, and so I just keep it on this sidebar rather than putting it on every single one of my DPS bars. To the left of that I keep Guthix's Blessing, which is not something I use commonly, but as I work my way towards 200 mil Dungeoneering, I find I use it occasionally at the end of a Guardian Door room which has a ton of stuff, and I'm suddenly at 100% adrenaline and I don't have anything left to kill. Under that is the ability Rejuvenate, which is really something that most people don't use, but recently has become very useful for me. This shares a cooldown with the Enhanced Excalibur, which is the reason that it's never been useful before. However, since I got the full set of Acto Primeval gear, and I've been tanking in that, the defensive resets on that are pretty common, and I find I'm using this a lot as base tank. It's a really great way to heal, even after you've used Excalibur for the first time, but I didn't have any room for this on my tank bars, which I had already filled up, so I put it over here instead. The last three abilities here at the bottom, Escape, Barge, and Surge, are all about mobility. Escape is something you'll use commonly at Nex on the Blood phase. Surge can be good for adrenaline stalling or moving around, and Barge is a great way to push yourself into melee distance with a target, which I'll use pretty commonly if I'm doing Slayer with melee. It's a great way to speed up the time of your Slayer tasks by moving in between monsters. For the last of my sidebars at the top, I have the two food that I commonly use. Shark for the things that I find really easy and that I don't want to spend a particularly large amount of money on, and Rocktails if I'm doing something that actually requires a little bit of effort, or if I'm doing a team boss and I want to contribute better DPS. Under that I have Brew and Restore Flasks, which you pretty much use everywhere. Under that I keep Super Prayer Renewal Potions, Replenishment Potions, and Supreme Overloads, and you use these pretty much everywhere, but you use them infrequently enough that you may as well just click them from your inventory. However, I'm trying to challenge myself a little bit more to doing things with keybinds to try and improve my dexterity a little bit and my actions per minute when it comes to PvM, so I put these onto a sidebar to try and minimize the amount of effort that I need to do with the mouse in case in the future maybe bosses require more mobility or things like that, or to just in general improve my proficiency when it comes to the bosses that exist already. To the right of that I have Dread Nips, and these are pretty much only useful at raids, but I keep these on here for exactly the same reason as the potions I just discussed. Under that I have Chain, and the reason I have Chain on here is because it's not a strong enough ability to incorporate into a plain magic DPS rotation. However, as long as it's hitting multiple targets, it is one of the stronger abilities for your basics, so I do find this something that I commonly use when there are a lot of chargers running around at Beastmaster, or for the puzzle and the jellyfish between the Beastmaster and Yakimaru fights. Underneath Chain I have Entangle, which is not a commonly useful thing. Occasionally if you're doing a north tanking role at Yakimaru and you're using magic, this can be useful for corralling some of the jellyfish, or if you happen to be doing feats, managing the jellyfish is a very important part of doing the more difficult Yakimaru feats. Underneath that I have Air Surge, and the only reason that's on here is because there's a bunch of bugs right now that are causing spells to be deselected, and there's nothing more irritating than getting started on a boss fight, particularly if you're bomb tanking at Virago or if you're at Yakimaru, and trying to engage in the fight and only to see that your chat box is suddenly spammed with "you must select a spell to cast this ability." So this is on here just to prevent me from having to open up the magic spell book to manually select to cast a spell. And finally, the three slots on the bottom left are simply debuffs. These are commonly used at Virago and at hard mode Virago, and also as the base tank you'll commonly want to use these at Beastmaster and Yakimaru as well. Thank you guys as always for watching. Hopefully this video gave you some tips and ideas for things that maybe you would like to put on a sidebar. As you can see in this clip that I took a little bit earlier today, I only recently had two sidebars, and I added an additional one because as part of this video I was asking a whole lot of friends what sorts of things they put on sidebars to make sure there weren't any things that I was missing or some cool stuff that I would be able to add maybe, and it turns out there was, and I was able to make another entire bar just from their suggestions, and they probably still missed plenty of things, so if there's stuff that I missed in this video that you think I could improve by having another sidebar, let me know. I'm totally interested in seeing what kind of stuff you guys put on there, like gear switches and things like that. So hopefully this was useful for you guys, especially for Travis who requested this video, and I will see you in the next video.